working all day long from sunrise to sunset in the scorching heat or the freezing colds with no food or water, performing manual labor in horrible working conditions, all for free. You guys would call that slavery, right? Well, that was known as the convict leasing system, also known as slavery by another name. The convict leasing system is defined as a system to lease out prisoners to railroads, mines, plantations with no pay, inhumane, and deadly working conditions. The importance of the convict leasing system is because it's an unknown subject to our American history that not a lot of people know about. There's a huge gap between the Civil War and World War II that you guys really didn't learn about in U.S. history. So first I will begin with discussing the history of the convict leasing system as the start date and the end date, and then I will be discussing the current relationship between the convict leasing system and mass incarceration. When did the convict leasing system start? The documentary Slavery by Another Name, published in 2018 by Anchor Books publisher, features interviews of the practice of the convict leasing system that stated that it took place between Civil War and World War I. This is a time where blacks weren't slaves but also weren't free at the same time. And it was all starting in 1867 when the convict leasing system practice was actually established. An article on PBS written and researched by Nancy Werger based on the documentary Slavery by Another Name, where she stated that there was no specific end date, that all states ended at their own time. However, all of the states did basically abolish the black codes in 1860, which made it more difficult to arrest people for the convict leasing system. So now we talked about the beginning and the end of the convict leasing system. Next, we will talk about the connection between the convict leasing system and mass incarceration. In 2011, Intellectual International Southern published From Slavery to Prisons, which stated that many scholars argued the Constitution was pro-slavery. Black codes were created, and if they were broken, that they were thrown into slavery, plantations, and prisoners, which would convey them to go to the convict leasing system. In Redressing in America via Mass Incarceration by Graf G., published in 2017, argues that the era of mass incarceration can be understood by a new tactic of slavery. So the NYPD does something called the Roundup, which is also known as racial profiling. In June 2005 to 2008, the NYPD arrested 85% of African Americans, which is known as racial profiling. Then there's something called the conviction marks, which is being pressured to plead guilty to a crime that you did not commit due to lack of representation. And then there's something called carrying out a title, which is being labeled as a felon. So you would carry that title on for the rest of your life, which will expose you to high risk of incarceration again. Also in the documentary 13 on Netflix, directed by Ava, published in 2016, the 13th Amendment states neither slavery nor involuntary servitude except the publishment of a crime whereof the parties shall be duly convinced shall exist in the U.S. or any place subject to their jurisdiction. So there's not much of a difference between the convict leasing system and modern mass incarceration. Both have little to no pay and both targeted the Black community. So in conclusion, we first talked about the history of the convict leasing system. We started with the end date and the starting point and the end date, then the relationship between the convict leasing system and mass incarceration. I'm gonna leave you guys with the quote from W.E. Du Bois with, "The slavery went, stood for a brief moment in the sun, then moved back towards slavery again."